So now please join me in welcoming Director Leslie Buchbinder, Ed Ruscha, Frank Gehry, and our moderator, Rani Singh. Ed, are you okay over there?
It was staggeringly powerful. I mean, I can't believe it.
How you doing, Frank?
I'm shaken after seeing that.
Well, I just want to start by thanking both Frank and Ed for joining us today. It's really a special and rare occasion to have them together. So we really appreciate it, and Leslie as well. But also, it's a testament so clearly to your friendship and relationship to Westermann. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
It's a real pleasure and an honor.
I think hats off to Leslie Buchbinder for her movie.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, quite a.
Well, you both were so important to the story because of your relationship with them. And
How long have you been working on it?
9 years. Yeah. So we'll do another film, okay? And
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah. Why not?
right.
I wanted to start by asking, both of you reference in the film the first time that you met Cliff. And Frank, for you, that was when you were working on the Billy Al Bankston's exhibition at LACMA.
Yeah.
And Cliff had an exhibition next door. And Ed, you mentioned the Tamarin workshop. And I'm wondering if either of you knew of Cliff's work beforehand, because he had shown in LA in a handful of really important exhibitions at Dilexi Gallery and Dwan Gallery, and of course at the New American Sculpture exhibition with Kenny Price and Lee Bonteque and John Chamberlain at the Pasadena Museum. So were you familiar with his work before you met him?
Just vaguely, and when I saw his work, I was knocked off my pedestal in a way that I was very surprised that I could see somebody who'd spent so much craftsmanship time on doing what they did. And so it was an awakening.
So I kind of like him, kind of heard of him, but I met him when he was on his hands upside down, and he was looking up at me, and he knew my sister and her husband, and my sister's sitting in the front row, so I can't say anything.
Well, Ralph
But
Nelson,
he called, he said, upside down, he said, "You're related to Rotten Ralph's. Your sister's married to Rotten Ralph."
well, he was very playful with his language, so we can attribute it to that.
He was very funny about it, and I think he loved Doreen too. But
Well, also because Ralph Nelson had also been running Dilexi Gallery, I believe, when Westermann showed there. So they probably met at that time.
Oh yeah, he knew him. They were good friends.
And so once you got to know him, Ed, I mean, he was really part of the scene, even though, I mean, he was born in Los Angeles and, lived some years here. But when he came back during the late 60s and the times that you knew him, he wasn't living here, but he stayed for a while. I mean, it really feels like he was part of the scene.
Well, he was born here, yes, and he lived down near Melrose off of La Cienega, back in there, Westmount or some street like that. I don't think his house still exists, but in the early 60s, mid 60s, it seemed like he was part of a group of people. Billy Al Bankston was also a gymnast, and Cliff was a gymnast.
Yeah.
Russ Tamblyn, who was a friend of all of ours, was a gymnast who managed to, during the Oscars ceremony, do a cartwheel across the stage, ending up in a perfect split at the end of the stage. And so it seemed like there were a lot of gymnasts around, or a lot of people doing physical things, and
You and I were not gymnasts.
we were not gymnasts. And Frank and I held hands saying, we're not gymnasts.
But you guys socialized together, often, didn't you? Go like most Musso and Frank's and some of the.
Yes,
Stamp.
Musso and Frank's. That was Cliff's favorite restaurant. And it would be today if he was still alive, I'm sure. And we had great times there. And he would go in and out of town, but he lived all over. I mean, he was centered in Chicago for a good amount of time. And I'm not sure he ever lived in New York City, but he, of course, centered himself in Connecticut mainly.
He, when my son, who's here tonight somewhere, was born,
Alejandro.
I sent out his birth card announcement. The little baby sitting in a very beautiful photo. And Cliff sent it back. He glued a picture of Lincoln on.
Well,
So
one
I
thing
have
that really comes across in the film, Leslie, is just the letters and the correspondence, and how that really kept his network connected with so many people, so many dear
I
friends.
got a lot of letters. I had more letter time with him than personal time.
Let's compare letters sometimes. I've got some good ones. And not only the letters, it's the envelopes that the letters came in.
With the pictures.
Yes. He'd do scenery on the envelopes.
The envelopes, yeah.
And I've got some beauties. And so we'll have to compare them.
We'll compare them. Yeah. Well, we can have a show of his.
Ed, do you want to share your envelope that you have?
I do have one letter that I have
Just
from,
happen to have?
from Cliff. I'd like to read. Okay, here's a
You have to see the front.
woodcut. A Cliff Westermann woodcut. So this letter comes to me on April Fool's Day, 1976. Up at the top it says, P.S. Say hello to Paulie, too. Paul, my brother. He's saying to say hello to Paul. It says, Dear Ed, I dreamed the other night that you had built a magnificent building that was like a magic fairyland, and inside, which was exposed to the height of an 8-story building, was this wonderful circular stairway that went all the way up the top. Well, old Cliff was at the top, and I started to walk down to see you. The treads had been varnished with about 10 coats, and there was ice on them. Ice on them. There was ice on them besides. Unfortunately, the handrail was just a piece of string. Well, I started down, and of course I slipped and went zooming out into space, did a couple of flips, and landed on my feet there in front of you. And I said, Ed, you fucked up. You really ought to do something with these motherfucking stairs and the lousy handrail. Well, you got pissed off and said, Cliff, are you criticizing my building? And of course, I said, why, no, Ed, I'm only suggesting a slight modification because somebody might get hurt. That didn't pacify you at all, and you stormed out of there and drove off in a huge, huge Euclid dump truck, and that was the end of that. I've thought of this dream and how unlike you are to the Ed in that dream. We think of you, and Ed, I hope you and everything is going swell for you. Would you tell Joe Good I love that jump rope he gave me and I use it all the time. It's well worn. Sincerely, Cliff. And on the side it says, the little flower sends her regards to Ed. That's Joanna. The little flower sends her regards to Ed. Those are the kind of letters he would write. And so I thought I took that as a good omen that he had this dream about me. And then about a week later, a wooden crate arrives, and inside of that crate is a work of art. It's a box with intricately carved letters, and that says Ed's Varnish. And I open the top up. The hinges are made with bronze that he has made by himself. He didn't trust hardware stores. He made his own screws and bolts and things like that. And so he was a magician in that sense. And so inside are 3 cans of marine spar varnish. And he said, after I spoke to him, I called him right away and said, thank you so much for that sculpture you sent me. Do I call it a sculpture? He says, just don't worry about it. He says, but use that varnish sometime. Use that varnish. And I told him at one time that there was an auction that I saw a work of his. It was a dustpan, a hand dustpan that was actually illustrated in Leslie's movie, and it's beautifully made, crafted with metal and wood and his own bolts and screws and all that, overbuilt as everything he made was. And he said, okay, but don't treat it like a work of art. Actually use the damn thing. That's the way he was.
You're talking about how overbuilt things were, and you all talked about visiting him in Connecticut, and there's a story, Frank. You talk about he was doing the cement foundation, and he said it didn't look perfect, but you said, Cliff, it looks perfect. Do you remember that at all? Yeah.
And he ripped it out and did it over. And then the wall, I was amazed. I went into this little house. You have to imagine this. It's on a windy street in Connecticut, and there's a very rough garden with trees and stuff, and a little tiny building.
Here, Frank, make sure.
Nondescript little building, and he and Joannie sitting on the porch. And then next to it, which is her mother's house, I think.
That's right.
Which was sort of those white and yellow with columns. It's sort of a pseudo-classical, whatever. Not a very good one.
Yeah.
And the lawn in front of that was perfectly cut and everything. And they were sitting on this porch in this wild garden with this. So I went in, I expected I was going to see a bunch of stuff all over. Well, it was, but it was perfect. The floor was perfect. The walls were perfect. He showed me the plaster walls that he just finished, and he said, see this, it's not right. And then while I was there, he tore it down. and he started building it again, I guess. He was, I don't know how to explain him, but he was a force of nature. but he was a perfectionist, which is crazy the way he did that.
It's amazing to see those images of his studio and the tools and, everything so well labeled and just perfect.
But one day I got a call from him. I hadn't seen him for a while. I got a call from him, and I don't know why he called me with this. He said, "Frank, Joanne's dying." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he says, "She's lying in bed and can't talk." And he was devastated. He was just, and so I didn't know what to do. So I called Milton Wexler, our friendly shrimp friend that took care of artists. And it turns out his brother was practicing shrink in Connecticut, and he went over and met with her. And within several weeks, I got her talking again. She had some kind of blackout about something that they were. But she was a trapeze artist. I mean, she was a school teacher when he met her. And then she became this fantastic trapeze artist where you saw pictures of. That was incredible. So she had a lot of stuff in here, and I think it all came to a crazy stop one day, but we got her out of it anyway.
Which, yeah, when you first talked about that, it was very touching that he trusted you all
Yeah, he did.
with his heart and his soul, and it comes across. And but you were very astute, because when you were first describing it to me, you were saying there's some psychological drama here between the big house, the perfectly coiffed
Yeah, so
big house.
something was going on, and I couldn't figure it out.
Yeah, and they're very raw and real, and no guff about anything, life. And
But it was like a cartoon seeing them both together.
yeah,
A
kind
real
of like
dichotomy, the difference between the
Right.
two.
and that seemed, as you had originally said, caused some sort of psychological friction and
Something-
fracture
It
of
did.
sorts.
Something was
But
going on, yeah.
but you saved the day.
Well, and Joanna went on to live, 15 years after
Yes.
Westermann passed away.
Yes. And she, she was a wonderful artist and who studied with
He
Joseph
sent me
Albers.
one of her paintings. I have
Yes.
a big one.
Yes.
When I first met him, he
Yeah. Yeah.
And Frank, did you feel an affinity towards him with his use of materials and just how, how,
Yeah, that was very inspirational, I think. I love wood, and I use it a lot. But he uses it with perfection. And as Ed was saying, he makes the little metal bolts and the screw. They're all made by him. He doesn't buy anything from the hardware store. He makes everything.
which is incredible to see. I mean, really, even, you
But you
mentioned.
think about that and the perfection of a trapeze artist at the same time. That's a perfection as well. So he's
You have to be perfect or you die, basically.
right. I think it was like that. And then somehow he got Joanne to climb up the trapeze and go with him. I can't imagine how that was.
That's trust.
She was a school teacher. Poor baby.
But you all, oh, sorry, go ahead, Ed.
Well, I was just going to say that everything in his art seemed to come out of these horrific experiences of his wartime when he saw horrible things happen and recounted them forever in his life as an artist. and with the rats and the dying at sea and sharks and dark animals, crows and ravens attacking ships and all that. And yet today, I see that as a culmination. Everything he did as an artist came out to have a very optimistic view of the world. And so it was all very positive. I'm sure that children today can look at his drawings and paintings and sculpture and all that and love all these little things. Look at all the rats. Look at all the rats.
Well, he also used, there was a sense of humor as well. I mean, and his use of words, and I would think, Ed, that would have some resonance for you as well.
But his work isn't that widely known, is it?
I don't know. I mean, he's got followers all over the world.
Really?
He's not as well known as he should be.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
But, as Barbara Haskell said, and as you all know, he was an artist's artist. So he's kind of been kept a secret among a group of artists, but an international secret at the same time. I remember, Ed, you were talking about, Jim Shaw and, Paul McCarthy, all these people, generations of artists were so influenced, and
Well, you
still the
see
case.
subsequent generations of artists,
Absolutely.
everything from the San Francisco funk to, the Chicago imagists, and now, with Paul McCarthy and Jim Shaw and Raymond Pettibone, there's that continuation. I would think younger artists would find a lot to draw on in his work.
Yes, and something else that Ronnie and I were talking about earlier is that at the time he was making a lot of this art, craft was really almost verboten,
Little passe.
It was not cool. And I saw in some of the materials for the hammer, one of the first words describing made in LA had to do with craft. And I thought, his time really has come.
Yeah.
It's but one thing that he always said is he loves quality of making, but it's quality of idea first. And I think that is one of the things that bond you all as artists, that you didn't necessarily talk about it. You talk about tools and stuff like that, but it was unspoken and shared. Do you think?
Yes.
Yeah.
For me, it was.
Good. Yeah.
Well, even talking, Ed, you mentioned that Cliff really had a lot of good, like one-off slogans and things, right? The guys
one
like
that I really liked is when anybody who he held in lower esteem, he would say, "That guy's got a neck like a stack of dimes." Yeah, and I always remember that one. Thank you, Cliff.
that's a good one.
What a great statement.
And Ed, at some point you created a work that was based on some of the imagery that he had sent you, the figure.
Cliff did these drawings of like a side view of some so-called capitalist guy with a John Waters mustache, and slicked back hair. And I always liked that. And so
I've got
finally adapted that. You got some of that?
I got one of those.
You got one of those. Okay.
So you adapted into your own work. You took.
Yeah, I had to adapt it. It just was too good to overlook.
begging to be.
Well, the perfection thing, the idea that you don't give up, I think that was an inspiration to me, actually. That, I mean, when you build stuff, build it right.
Yeah.
That's it.
You know, the high top black polished shoes inside of a glass case where it says the last ray of hope. Now that's a great statement, I think. And he's done so many things like that you could make a Bible out of it.
Right.
Yeah. It's basic. He had a piece, March or Die, and related to that, it's the keep moving, keep going.
But after seeing your film, I was only involved maybe with 10% of all that. I mean, it's staggering. I knew that was going on, but when you see it all together, it's mind blowing. I think I can't.
Well, and so many of his statements about art and life
I'm gonna change after the film.
are really profound. Well, we have a few minutes, so maybe we can take a couple of questions. We have about 5-7 minutes left, and there's people on the side who have microphones. So if you have a question, perhaps you can raise your hand, and usher will come.
Hi, good evening. I don't have a question, actually. I'm one of the producers on the film. I just want to acknowledge the fact that Martha Westermann Renner, Cliff's sister, is actually in the audience with her family tonight. So, thank you, Martha. You're an enormous part of this project.
Oh, she's right. Wonderful.
Hey, Martha.
Thank you, Martha, for coming. Well, you were an amazing presence in the film. I think there's also a few other people who were in the film. I believe Happy Price is here, and maybe one or two others. So, as I said before, it really is a testament to the network and the friendships, and Wendy Al Bankston is here as well, and I feel like, Kenny and Billy Al are part of this conversation, and it really comes through in the film. Another question?
Hey, I've got one little bitch.
Okay.
Somebody from the Art Forum magazine asked me to write something about Billy Al Bankston. So I was writing on about our experiences and everything, and I said, well, Cliff Westermann is part of our lives. And that Cliff had, Billy would say that Cliff was a very important part of his life. And I wrote something that said Cliff was one of Billy Al Bankston's, how did I say it? I said one of Billy Al Bankston's favorite human beings. And they edited it and said Cliff was one of Billy Al Bankston's favorite humans. And I thought, is that the art of editing or what?
Well, I'm glad we got to clarify that here.
I would say that was a live letter to the editor.
Did you have a question?
Yes, so Cause was an executive producer. This is a question for Leslie. Cause was an executive producer for the film. Can you talk about, how that conversation went in terms of Cause being, a major contemporary artist of a younger generation, and what does Westermann's work mean to somebody like Cause or other artists of his cohort, and how do you see Westermann's work being, received going into the future?
Great question. Well, like Frank and Ed, artists of any generation, basically, who can look at Westermann's art, and Cause not only looked at it, but started purchasing his art because he needed to live with it in order to inspire him. And so we were very lucky to be able to film Ed and Frank and Cause, not Cause himself, but at the studio, all the pieces that he had there. But yes, I really think that there's so many artists who can relate to so many elements of Cliff. How many times have we heard post-traumatic stress syndrome? And of course, it's not just for World War II and for the Korean War. It's or for Joanna Beale's bifurcated home. It's for so much that's going on in the world today. And I think that that Cliff showed a way of dealing with trauma. He used it. He ended up living on what became death ships, and the death ships ultimately saved him. Thank you.
I think it's also worth mentioning that the Smart Museum is a partner with you and helped fund the production of the film. And maybe you can tell us a little bit that the archive, Westermann's archive, is there, and it's actually a living, a teaching university where they have classes and people are using the materials. Is that
Yes, absolutely. And we worked with them. They scanned all the letters, and you all have some letters there, and thank you. And it's a way for, well, they've been incredible. It allows people to do research about Cliff's work, and they do have, I mean, the letters were the foundation for the script. It was a quilting together of various portions of letters, over 1,000 letters. And, he made these gifts for everyone, and letters were gifts. And as both Ed and Frank have talked about, those are so valuable, both for research, but also for their aesthetic beauty. Also, who writes anymore? Handwriting. Yeah.
Well, you did a beautiful job of kind of knitting it all together with the letters and just the way you told the story. And I think it's going to go a long way for people to be exposed to Cliff Westermann's work. So thank you. And thank you both for, all three of you, for being part of this evening tonight.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Frank.